Anyone wants to speak on that amendment? The member for Fredericton South and leader of his party.
Speaker, it's a pleasure to speak on, well, I guess the amendment, second reading to Bill 39, an act respecting the proof of immunization. Now, of course, the current situation is that there's a requirement for proof of immunization. Essentially, it's mandatory that children in school are to be immunized, as it should be, except for some exemptions. And one of them is for health reasons, where a doctor has to provide information to attest to the fact that there are health reasons for which a student should be exempted from that requirement. And then currently there's also a second exemption which provides, if a written statement is provided on a form provided by the minister, signed by the parents, outlining the reasons for the objection based on conscious or religious beliefs, then that can be submitted. So that's where we're at today, Mr. Speaker. I think certainly I support it going to law amendments because, for one thing, I'd like to hear from the Chief Medical Officer of Health on this. The Minister of Education has been carrying the ball on a question of public health practice for some time. And I think it's appropriate that the Medical Officer of Health herself come to committee and speak to this issue. We've got lots of questions, not the least of which is on the implementation of this, how to make sure that it would be implemented effectively, that both the public health system and the education system have the capacity to do this in the time allotted, Mr. Speaker, because it's not that straightforward. You can think of all kinds of cases where people might not have the necessary documentation, recent immigrants, women who have recently fled domestic violence situations and don't have any of their kids' paperwork. And anyways, you get my drift. There's all kinds of scenarios one could imagine. So it does require a robust system, both on the school side of things and on the public health side of things, to make sure this happens. Because, Mr. Speaker, I believe a lot of the problems we've had to date in terms of children not being properly immunized or having their immunization up to date really has to do with the system we have in place to help get kids immunized. It's not as easy as it should be. It's not like falling off a log and there you're immunized. So life is busy. And parents, we all lose track, and so life intervenes. So we need at the same time as we move forward on this, a system to ensure that the immunization process happens easily, smoothly, fluidly. So those are some of the other questions that would be important to ask the Chief Medical Officer of Health. And if it goes to committee, Law Amendments Committee, Mr. Speaker, at the same time, the Deputy Chief Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Muick, who has considerable expertise in immunization and infectious spread of infectious diseases, such as those that we immunize against, will be also another sort of expert witness that would be good to hear from, Mr. Speaker, so that it gets kind of airing it needs. And as I said, particularly my concern is on its implementation, that it be done effectively, that there aren't unintended consequences, that we try and think of these things up front, and that the necessary measures be put in place, whether it's resources or people, both on the education side and on the public health side, to deliver on the necessary objective and goal here of having all those children, other than the ones who, for health reasons, cannot be immunized in our school system. There is another little change, which is, I think, beneficial, which is the way the legislation currently is written. It's students coming into the school system, and this is going to be proposed to be changed to ensure that it's any children in the school system, which would seem to be appropriate, so that we're not just catching people people coming in, but those who, for one reason or another, haven't got their immunization up to speed who are in the system. So that's a positive measure here. But absolutely, maybe even at the committee, from Law Amendments Committee, we could hear from the Minister of Health himself on this question, because we are talking, after all, about questions of public health, about questions of immunization, how to ensure we're getting herd immunity. What a terrible term. I don't know who came up with that, but maybe we could change it. I don't know. But the concept is clear. It's well proven and necessary. And at the same time, we can ask, things like, how many parents have actually, percentage-wise, taken advantage of the other exemption besides the public health exemption that's currently available based on conscience or religious belief? I have no idea. It'd be good to know whether that's something that many people have taken advantage of or not, and whether of those who have used the forms that the minister provides to make that argument, how much of that was based on a religious concern, how much was matters of personal conscience. So in any event, lots of questions to be asked in committee, so that's why certainly we'll support the motion, or the amendment, I'm sorry, here at second reading to move this into the Standing Committee on Law Amendments, and we can have a real opportunity to bring some of the health experts forward and quiz them on that side of things, because when all is said and done, Mr. Speaker, the goal is to improve public health, to improve the health and safety of our children in the school system. That's where we want to get to. That's the motivation for this, and who better to ask questions of that than those health professionals who run our public health system day in and day out. So not to in any way reduce the contribution here that the Minister of Education and Early Childhood Care is making to this effort, but at some point, we get into an area where we need to have some professional those professional expertise in the field answer some of our questions, so that would enable this opportunity. And at the Committee of the Whole, we can't do that. We can't get the Minister, as I understand, we can't get the Chief Medical Officer of Health or her Deputy Medical Officer of Health before this Legislative Assembly, and I believe, well, in fact, they both should be called to committee. So those are my thoughts, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the motion that the move to amend that the official opposition has brought forward, and I think it would add quality to the debate around this. And as I said, in summing up, I think we've got to get this right in terms of ensuring that its implementation and the things that are necessary to actually meet the goals of all of this are in place. Because clearly, to date, that's not been the case. Otherwise, we would have a much higher percentage of children whose immunization records are right up to date than is the case now. So we need to answer the questions: how do we get there, and ensure that the objectives are met effectively, and that we don't create unintended consequences. So thank you, Mr. Speaker.